All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Drew Malmuth. I'm the Assistant Director of Learning at the National Guild for Community Arts Education, and I'm really thrilled to have you all here for today's webinar, Conference Proposals Demystified. And we're going to be talking about submitting sessions for our upcoming conference, which is taking place in Austin this fall, October 30th through November 2nd. So before we get started, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping and a little bit of tech overview. So because of the size of the group today, your lines have been muted. But we really want folks, the main goal of this session is to give information, but also provide opportunities for people to ask questions. So at any point throughout the presentation, if you do have a question, feel free to put it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The chat icon will also show up, but that chat has been disabled, again, because of the size of the group. We want to make sure we know where your questions are going. So if you do have a question, feel free to put it into that Q&A box, and we will get to it either out loud. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can verbally, but we also will have some staff that'll try and get to those questions via typing. So it just depends on the nature of the question, but we will try to get to as many as we can if you get it into that Q&A box. So just again, my name is Drew Malmuth. I'm the Assistant Director of Learning at the Guild, and this fall will be my 5th conference that I've worked on with the National Guild, and every time it gets more fun, and I'm just really excited to engage with you all today and to share some ideas about how we can make it a really effective conference. Quanice, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Quanice Wood. I'm the Director of Learning and Leadership Development here at the Guild. I just hit my 2-month mark, so I'm really excited. This is my first conference that I'm behind the scenes on. I've participated in probably the last 3 or 4 conferences as a participant and a facilitator, and I am here to help. So I look forward to seeing your questions and answers in the box.
Thanks, Quanice. So I'm going to quickly go over the agenda. We have a lot to cover, and I do want to leave a lot of time for questions. So first, just for those who aren't super familiar with the Guild, I'm going to go over our vision, mission, and values, just to give you a sense of what we do and what we stand for. Then we're going to give a little bit of a conference overview. This will include the program, the participants, people who come to the conference, what the audience looks like, and what are some of those demographics. And then after that, I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of how you actually propose a session, what are the different steps that you take, and how to go about doing that. Then I'm going to look into what makes an effective proposal. So we'll give some ideas. There's no one formula, but we'll give some of our thoughts on what have been effective conference sessions in the past, what usually leads to success with a conference session, what to think about as you're constructing it. And this will really be the meat of the presentation, and we'll often pause during this portion of the talk just to open it up for questions and to hear from you all. Then we'll talk about the review and notification process, some of the key dates, when you'll hear back from us, and what that process looks like. Then briefly, we'll talk about some of the registration policies. For those who do have their session accepted and become a speaker, there are specific policies around that and benefits, so we want to make sure everyone's aware of that. And then throughout, I'm going to pause for opportunities for folks to ask questions, but there will be a chunk at the end of today's presentation just for last questions that come in and a little bit more of a dialogue in Q&A. Okay, so just to start out with an overview of the Guild. The Guild is 82 this year. We're a rather old organization, but we have evolved a lot, especially in the last 10 years, I would say. Since I've been at the Guild, which will be 5 years this year, we have really sharpened what our mission, vision, and values are. And actually prior to 2015, the Guild just hadn't articulated clearly what our values really were as an organization. So since I've been with the Guild, we've gone through numerous processes of understanding really what we're trying to achieve. What do we want to see change in the field of community arts education? And what do we uphold as those core values for our work? So our vision, we envision a nation where arts education is accessible and embraced as essential for human development and healthy communities. Our mission is to ensure all people have opportunities to maximize their creative potential by developing leaders, strengthening organizations, and advocating for community arts education. within that mission, you can see there's those 3 buckets of our activities. We really like to think that everything we do falls into one of those buckets. Some fall into many. The conference falls into all of them. But we really like to conceptualize our work within those 3 areas of activities. And then our values: leadership, equity, creativity, and community. And I highlight this because our values are really the first lens through which we examine session proposals, through which we try to understand whether a proposal is going to be effective in the context of our conference. These values are really our due north when we're making those assessments. So I encourage folks to take a look at the longer descriptions of our values, which are on our website, and just to think about, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but an addition to the application this year was an area to clearly identify how your proposal reinforces or is in alignment with the Guild's values. So I encourage you to think about that and to consider how your proposal might reinforce these core values for our work. Okay, so getting into a little bit of the audience for the conference. So who comes to our conference? It's a really diverse and amazing group of people. For those who have been there before, I think something we hear all the time is that it feels like people have found their home. It is a really disparate group of folks, but they all really believe in the value of community arts education and are working towards strengthening their communities through the arts. So just some of the numbers. In 2018, there were over 700 delegates from over 400 organizations in more than 40 states. And last year in particular, there were more than 700 adult delegates, but as some of you may have seen or heard, we also had nearly 100 youth participants in our National Young Artist Summit, which took place on the Saturday of the conference. So it's shifting every year in terms of what those demographics look like, but that's a general sense of who is coming to the conference, the numbers, and the breadth of people that are coming from all around the country. Typically, we find that at the conference, we have leaders of nonprofit organizations and civic agencies that provide arts education. So historically, the conference has been composed of a lot of executive directors, a lot of the leaders of the organizations in the field. That still is the case to some extent, but we're finding more and more that executive directors are sending their program directors, maybe because they've gone a number of times and they want to start spreading the learning to others on their staff. So a lot of the folks that come to the conference may be at that program director level. There are still a number of executive directors, but we've really found that that all throughout the hierarchy of an organization, folks are starting to come to the conference. So it has changed over the years, but you still can conceptualize the audience as leaders at these organizations. We have staff, we have faculty and teaching artists, and we have trustees. The core of the audience is arts administrators, for sure, but we have an increasing number of teaching artists that come every year. We have deep discounts for teaching artists, and we really encourage teaching artists to show up and to be a part of these really vital conversations. Some of the programming at the conference has been specifically geared toward teaching artist development, which is something that we encourage, and we look for opportunities to do that work. And then as well, trustees are an audience. Often we'll have a Saturday Institute or a series of sessions that serve maybe both executive leadership and trustees in relationship with one another, or maybe specifically for trustees around how to fundraise as a board member. So we really encourage organizations to bring trustees to help them deepen their understanding of the work on the ground, and that is an important audience for us. As well, we want to bring other stakeholders into the conversation. Sometimes conferences can feel like preaching to the choir, and we really want to bring in funders who may consider funding the arts and want to know more about it. We want to bring in funders that are already supporting arts education to understand from them what made them excited about supporting this work. We want to bring in cross-sector allies. So over the last few years, especially, we've been successful at getting folks to come to the conference that are more in the youth development sector, more working at youth-serving institutions. So bringing in people that are in our same sphere, but maybe aren't always having the conversation with the community arts education field. So that can include people from higher ed, academics, and other allies that are really centered on advancing our communities, but maybe doing it in a slightly different way. And then finally, it's a diverse, dynamic community of leaders. And we really think that everyone that comes to the conference is a leader in their own way, and we want to support that trajectory. So everyone is bringing something, everyone is bringing a different experience, and really value the incredible diversity and breadth of the folks that come to our conference every year. So I'm going to briefly go over our tracks. For those that have come to the conference before, the conference is organized along specific tracks. And I'm going to go over the 2018 conference tracks, but before I do, I'll just highlight that the tracks are a bit of a conversation with the field. We know that there are going to be specific tracks that we will focus on this year, but we also leave track spaces open depending on what folks are really excited about, what's really vibrant, particularly in the communities that we're going to be in this fall, which is in Texas. So as I talk through these, I may identify some that will be conference tracks this year, but keep in mind that some of these may shift and some of them may change, particularly depending on what we hear from the session proposal. So if you do end up submitting a session, you'll see there's an opportunity for you to indicate which track your proposal most aligns with, and also an opportunity to say, I don't see which track my proposal might align with, so here's the suggestion for another track that you might consider. And often we do shift our thinking around our tracks depending on the ideas that we get from the field. So last year we had tracks in arts and education. So this was a track for folks that are working in partnership with K-12 schools. We had a track for creative youth development. And this creative youth development, for those who haven't heard that term, it's really the intentional integration of high quality arts learning with youth development principles. We had a track on leadership development, which is core to the Guild's work. We have our Community Arts Education Leadership Institute, and every year we will have a track on leadership development. In fact, all these three that I've just identified, these are central to the Guild. These are some of our key initiatives. So these are always going to be a conference track. Organizational health and sustainability. This was something we tried last year that was successful and was well received. And this was really focusing on funding, on best practices to make sure that your organization is funded and sustainable over time. Social justice. I'll call out that social justice themes and a lens of social justice is weaved throughout all of our programming. But we also heard from the community that it is valuable to have a track where folks can specifically discuss issues of social justice within the field of arts education. So we had it as a track last year, which I think was successful for a number of reasons, but we also infused the ideas and the principles of social justice into everything that we do. There was a human resources track, and there was also, which was new for last year, a lessons from Baltimore track. And this was really our way of considering how is this conference, while it being a national conference, how is this conference taking the lessons from the city that we were in? And last year, for folks that weren't there, we were in Baltimore, Maryland. We really wanted to highlight the vibrant, incredible work that was happening in Baltimore for folks coming in from around the country. So we don't want people to come to our conference and just dip in and then dip out. We want people to get a sense for the landscape that they're in. We want people to honor the work that's already happening on the ground and to be able to learn from it. So that was a bit of an experiment last year, and that track was a little bit unique in that all of the programming happened off-site. So there were sessions that happened on the Thursday and the Friday. There were 3-hour sessions where folks got out of the hotel and really learned about what's happening in Baltimore and saw the work happening on the ground. So that may be a track this year. It's likely, but it depends on what we hear from the field and what we're hearing from the community and what we're hearing from you all. So that's what happened last year. And as I mentioned, it may shift. The ones we know that we are going to do are those top 3. And also we know that this year we will be doing a track on creative aging. So if you're considering a proposal around arts programming that serves adults over 55, there will be a track that's dedicated to that work, which reflects the Guild's deepening practice around creative aging. But beyond that, we are looking for tracks that are really going to meet the needs of the community as it exists now. We know that things change. We know that coming into Texas, coming into Austin, people will want to have particular types of conversations. And we want to honor that and leave a little bit of flexibility depending on what's happening on the ground. All right, so getting into the meat of what the conference entails. The conference is primarily an opportunity for professional development and networking. So we have a number of different ways that that happens. And I'll go over just a little bit, but I would encourage folks to take a deeper dive into what the conference program looks like. There'll be links later on and more reminders of this, but you can go to communityartsed.org. And on there, you'll be able to track down the submission form for submitting a session for the conference. And there you can find links to the 2018 program and some other resources that will give you a sense of the breadth of what the program entails, what the different sessions are, what are the themes, what do the speakers look like. So I encourage folks to do that, but I will give a little bit of an overview here, just for those who don't know all that much about the Guild Conference, so you can have a sense of where your ideas and where your sessions might fit in. So we hold pre-conference institutes, and that happens on the Wednesday. This year will be October 30th. Pre-conference institutes vary in terms of how many we program. Last year we had 6. Sometimes we have maybe one more. Sometimes we maybe have one less. But these are really an opportunity to take a deep dive into a particular topic. So we may do a pre-conference institute on working in K-12 schools, a really deep full-day institute that sets the foundation for learning for the rest of the conference. We did, for the first time last year, we had pre-conference institutes that were specifically designed for arts educators working toward racial justice. We had one session that was for white folks doing that work, and we had another session that was for leaders of color that were doing that work. So they had a full day as an affinity space to work through issues of promoting racial justice within the field from their particular vantage point. So that's just an example of some of the learning that happens in those pre-conference institutes. And those are really curated and worked through on the Guild's end, and they set up the learning for the rest of the conference. There's also deep dive sessions, which are a little bit longer. I'll talk about the breakout sessions and the length and what they usually look like in a moment. The deep dive sessions are usually 3 hours, which is about double what a breakout session would be. And that's really an in-between between 90 minutes, which is a typical breakout session, and what you might see in a pre-con, which is that full day. So in some cases, folks will, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but sometimes someone will submit a session that they may have conceived of it as a breakout, but we might think there's more there, or we might see that it ties into something else that somebody submitted across the country that person didn't even know about. We might combine them and see how that might fit together. So it gives us this flexibility in terms of length of time and what we're going to achieve. The length of the sessions is really dependent on the goals, what people want to get out of it. And if we feel like a larger container is going to help folks to have a better experience, we'll experiment with those deep dive sessions. But primarily, and especially for folks on this webinar, what you are probably going to be most concerned with is considering a breakout session. So on Thursday and Friday, we have 2 blocks of breakout sessions. Throughout the conference, we have over 50. And this is really the meat of the programming for folks. These are 90-minute sessions, and they fit into our tracks. So this is really what people should have in mind when they're considering their proposal. They vary in terms of the type of session and the way that it unfolds, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But the breakout sessions are really where a lot of the learning happens for the people at the conference. I'm going to pause just for a moment. I know I haven't gotten into the kind of meat of things yet, but I just want to see if there are any questions out there. Juanice, do you see anything coming in?
I don't see any questions coming in.
Okay, I'll keep going. If folks have questions as I go, feel free to put it into the Q&A. So just to continue with some of the programming that happens at the conference, a lot of the programming happens on the Guild's end, but I want folks to have a sense for the breadth of what's going on, just so you can see where your ideas might fit in alongside what's already happening. So on Thursday morning, we will generally do roundtables that are discipline specific. So this is an opportunity for folks for dance to get together, for music to get together. The majority of the programming that happens at the conference is interdisciplinary. We want people in the same room that may be focusing on different disciplines, but those roundtables are often a chance for those connections to happen. The ambassador breakfast happens on Friday mornings. As many of you know, the Guild has member networks that are led by ambassadors. It's an opportunity to meet them, to learn about their work. And I'll talk a little bit more about the networks in a moment. We also have special events, the opening night reception, the closing night reception, various other social activities that happen that create networking opportunities. We also have our expo, which is a chance to meet vendors and those working in the field. And then we have our next level luncheons, which happen on Thursday. And this is really, you grab a lunch, and over the years, it has progressed almost into a breakout session. But this is slightly less formal. People are eating sandwiches, but it is a time for concrete learning. And those are generally programmed on the Guild's end, but we do take into account ideas and submissions that have come from folks in the field. And then we have our office hours, which is a really popular and sometimes not always known about facet of the conference. So if you are coming or know other people that are coming, do check out the office hours, which is essentially an opportunity for you to book a half an hour conversation with an expert in the field. So the Guild looks at folks that are coming. We identify people that we really think are experts in what they do. Although, there are so many that come, we try to whittle it down to folks that we know that people really want some face time with. And then we open that up to the group at the conference and let them choose time blocks that they can go and just speak to that person for half an hour one-on-one. So I encourage you to check that out. If you're interested in being an expert within office hours, I'd also encourage you to reach out to us. And we start programming that a little later in the year, but it's always nice to know if folks are interested. Just continuing with what some of the programming looks like at the conference. The Guild, for those of you who aren't aware, the Guild currently has 9 national networks that are designed to support our membership around particular topic areas. So we have the Arts and Education Network, we have the Artist for Racial Equity Network, that was formerly the Alana Network, and that's designed to support leaders of color in the field. We have the White Advocates for Racial Equity Network, we have our Large Schools Network, and there are a number of other networks. I would encourage folks, you'll see, for those who do end up submitting a session proposal, you'll see that we ask within which network your proposal might most align. So it doesn't have to be an exact alignment with what these networks are working on, but I encourage folks before you submit a proposal, go and look at these different networks on our website, look at their mission, look at what they've been working on in the past, and then you'll be better equipped to say, okay, my ideas for my session proposal align in one way or another with what the Arts and Education Network has been working on. We ask this because we, over the years, have really wanted to align what's happening in the breakout sessions, what's happening in those conversations on Thursday and Friday with what our networks are working on throughout the year. We don't want the breakout sessions to be something that happens and then there's no way to continue that conversation. We want there to be continuity between what the presentations are in those breakouts and what the networks are discussing, so that after the conference is over, folks can continue to engage with the networks, and there's a common thread with what was presented at the conference and what the networks will continue to talk about throughout the year. So it doesn't have to be an exact match, but it's good, I think, for those who are submitting a session proposal to consider where this content might align and even build off of presentations that networks have done in the past. And it's a great opportunity for us too to see, okay, this person has submitted a session proposal. We know that the network is working on this. Let's connect them. Let's consider how they can build off of one another. It's really just an effort to make the conference more cohesive and to make it, to set up the programming for the rest of the year in a more cogent way. Continuing with the conference program and what's going to happen at the conference itself, we have showcases and site visits. So we have program showcases, we have student performances. For those that have been to the conference in the past, each of our plenaries is kicked off with at least one, sometimes 2 student performances. Sometimes we've had pop-up student performances at various sites around the hotel. And we really see this as an opportunity to showcase what's happening in Austin, the incredible work that's being done there to support all learners, not just young learners. We often have creative aging programs that are part of the student performances. And then really importantly, this third bullet, these are our site visits, and these are the off-site sessions that we curate with the local partners. And there may be some folks who are on the call today who are based in Austin. In the session submission form, you won't see a particular spot where you can say, I think that this session might work as a site visit. But if you do have local space and you are interested in potentially hosting or potentially bringing folks to your site, you can indicate that in the proposal. And really, these site visits have evolved to not just be, okay, let's get on a bus and see the work that's happening, but to use the site as a launching off point for a really deep, vibrant conversation. Often it's almost a full day. We have our Saturday mornings, we have our awards breakfast, and then after that, we send everyone out into the community. They choose their site visits, sometimes based on discipline, other times based on topic. It might be a site visit to a creative youth development organization. So for folks that are local, I encourage you, if you did have an idea for a site visit, you can incorporate that into your proposal. It's not, you won't have the opportunity to say, I only want to submit a site visit, but we'll get the idea based on the content. Before I get into the sample topics, I saw maybe a couple of questions come in. Quinnies, were you able to answer those via text?
Yes. So
okay,
I was
great.
able to answer, but just in case anyone might have similar questions, someone asked if it was possible to indicate the days you are available for speaking if you're not available for the full conference. So yes, once your conference proposal is accepted, or if your conference proposal is accepted, we will reach out to you for your availability. Another question was about museums being involved in this conference. So our conference encompasses every member from the arts education stakeholder spectrum, whether it's performing arts, visual arts, board members. So anyone who's a part of the arts education learning experience can be a part of the conference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe on the form we don't ask people to indicate concretely what their availability might be, and that's only because things change so much from now into the fall, and we also want people to be as open as possible. It's not always possible for folks to have that availability across the multiple days, but it's a process piecing all of these together. So we do hope that people will try and make themselves available as much as they can. But as Connie said, often what we'll do is, and I'll talk about this in a moment, provisionally accept an application, and that would involve us reaching out, having conversations about availability, refining, considering how that topic might be blended with another. So it's generally an ongoing process. It's quite rare that we'll accept a topic as is. So it's ongoing after the session is submitted. All right, this slide is relatively self-explanatory, but I wanted to give folks a sense of the breadth of the programming that happens. Often there's combinations between these two, and I would encourage folks to consider what that looks like. There's a bullet for equity and social justice that can be infused into any of these topics, and I'll emphasize many times throughout this presentation that is something we really are looking for. If you are, no one should assume that there can't be an element of a conversation around equity just because of the nature of your topic. We've seen equity be infused into topics in a number of really interesting ways. So I would encourage folks to consider that. And there's a spot where you can highlight that in your application. So think about that a little bit before you submit. And yeah, just take a look at these various sample topics that exist. I will call out some of the ones that we don't always get as many applications as we might hope for, including marketing, and last year fundraising as well. Our audience tends to be heavy on the program side, but there are folks there that are really considering marketing. And we have done a number of great sessions on sort of best practices in arts ed marketing, but we're always looking for more presentations on that, and also around fundraising. We would love to deepen some of our learning this year in particular around development and fundraising. So if you have some unique strategies or some things that have really worked well for you, I encourage you to submit those topics. We tend to get a vast majority of our sessions that are submitted are related to effective programming, which is fantastic. But if you did have a good idea or something that you're working on in those areas of fundraising, finance, marketing, things on the organizational health and sustainability side, sometimes that is a little bit underrepresented. So I encourage folks to consider some of those topic areas. Okay, so just getting into now what we're really hoping for from this conference. And this is coming into the section of the presentation where we're really going to identify what makes for an effective proposal, what we're looking for from the session proposals, and what we're really hoping to achieve as a whole from this conference. So at the Guild, we envision a conference that is rooted in social justice and racial equity. We envision a conference that is infused with creativity and artistry. And we envision a conference that is designed to showcase innovative, transferable strategies for advancing our work. So these are some of the core things that we hope to get out of this conference this year. Every year we strive to achieve this, but we wanted to articulate it just so folks have a sense of what's the end goal? What are we really trying to achieve with this conference? And so we're going to look for session proposals that ideally can hit on all three of these. That may not be the case, but consider this lens when you're shaping your proposals. This is really what we hope for from our conference, and we're going to be looking for sessions that can plug into what we're trying to create. All right, proposing a session.
Oh,
yeah, go ahead, Connie.
Someone asked if you can go back to what you indicated as sometimes underrepresented topics. If
Sure.
You can repeat whatever those topics are, please.
Sure. So I'm going to just look at this list and maybe give my sense of what those look like. So we have, I would say, board development, facilities, finance, fundraising, and marketing, and technology and innovation. I would flag those as generally underrepresented. We have a lot around community engagement, a lot around creative youth development, a lot around equity and social justice. And I really don't want to minimize the importance of those topics, but the bulk of the session proposals that come in are in that area. So if you have ideas in the more nuts and bolts, and in the advocacy area, which maybe Quanice could say a little bit about, but we really are looking to beef up our opportunities for learning around how to advocate for arts education. We haven't gotten a ton of topics, or haven't gotten a ton of proposals around that in the past. So that's one I would flag as well, alongside the real nuts and bolts, some of the elements of better supporting and funding your programs. Okay, are there any more questions right now, Quanice, or?
Nope, we're good to go.
Okay, great. So getting into why you all are here, the meat of proposing a session. What does that look like? So anyone can propose a session. You don't have to be a member of the Guild. You don't have to be an arts education practitioner. You have to care about the world of community arts education, and you have to have something that you want to say, but we want it to be multidisciplinary. We want it to be cross-sector. So we invite session proposals from anyone that is invested in the field. You'll be able to complete your proposal form at www.communityartsed.org. You can also go to nationalguild.org/conference. That will get you there as well. It'll get you to a splash page, and if you go down just a little bit, you'll see a link to submitting a session proposal form. And the deadline, we'll reiterate this a couple of times, the deadline is May 3rd to submit a session proposal. So there are a few things that are new to the proposal process this year. And this is mainly for folks that have submitted before and maybe are considering just recycling what they've done in the past. I would encourage folks to pay attention to what's new this year. And also, if you haven't submitted, it's nice to know the new additions that we've made, just so you can consider that in framing your proposal. So we added a question this year explicitly calling out whether there's going to be art making and/or creativity incorporated into your session. And that just doesn't have to be the case. There are a number of sessions where that might not make sense, but we found increasingly that people that are coming to the conference, they're kinesthetic learners, they want things to be a little bit more hands-on. They're also artists. Vast majority of the people that are there are artists, and artistry is a big part of what they do, and consequentially, it's a big part of how they learn and how they process information. So not only do we think that it makes it more fun and more creative, but we think that it also infuses a different modalities of learning for the people that are at the conference. So we really encourage folks to think about how art making or creativity might be incorporated into what you're doing. It doesn't have to be doesn't have to be the whole part of the session. It doesn't have to be an elaborate approach. Just something, maybe 5 minutes of art making or drawing, or just that little spark of creativity, I think can make a real difference. We also added this year the option for folks to use a session description video. This is optional, but we found that sometimes people want to describe their session verbally. Sometimes they want to take out their phone and just say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. And we don't want to privilege the fact that somebody may not come through as effectively in the written word. And we want to give folks who just want to talk about what they're doing an option to do that, because that could be really engaging. It can also demonstrate to us what you might be like as a presenter and as a facilitator. So you do have to write down a description of what the session would be, but you can say in your description, here's what I'm thinking, but I also attached this video, so check that out if you want a bit of a different sense of what I'm thinking. So that's new this year. We also added a question about how your proposal aligns with the Guild's values. This is really important to us now that we've articulated our values, and now that we're using that as a core lens through which we evaluate the sessions. We really want to know, from your perspective, how does this session align with either one or all of the Guild's values. And then, as I mentioned, we have a section where we ask folks how their session aligns with the Guild member networks. So this requires a little bit of investigation into what our networks are, what they've been doing, and it's just an opportunity for you to say, well, my proposal is around creative youth development. This ties into the presentation that the CYD network did last year around supporting teaching artists in creative youth development, just as an example. So there are any number of ways that you could tie your session into what's already happening at the Guild. And just, again, this is a way to maintain continuity with what the Guild is already doing and continue to build on conversations rather than reinventing the wheel. All right, so getting into what really makes for an effective proposal. And as I said before I continue, it's really not a one-size-fits-all. These are things that we've learned over the years in terms of what makes effective proposals for our conference. But we're always open to new ideas. We're always looking for new ways to push the programming forward. So this is just general overview of what we find to be effective. We encourage you to consider it, but also lean on what you know and what you have found to be effective in your own work. So choosing and articulating a topic. Choose a topic relevant to a national audience. This one's really key. We get a lot of proposals that may be specific to a particular city, or they may be specific to a particular discipline. Very rarely that can be the case, depending on the type of proposal that's submitted, but what we're really looking for are those cross-cutting issues. If you submit a session around how to effectively evaluate a dance program, think about how you might tweak it to say how to effectively evaluate any program or a program to the studio, or broadening the scope is always going to make the submission a little bit more successful in our eyes. And this is really, reiterate this multiple times because we have to reject a number of proposals out of hand because they're very specific to either one regional audience or specific to a particular discipline within arts education, which isn't always a factor in us deciding not to accept that proposal, but it very often is. If it doesn't feel like anyone from any discipline can come into the session and find themselves, that's something we're considering right off the bat. Next is to focus on the innovative and/or exemplary practices. A lot of the people that come to this conference are rather sophisticated in this work. They've been doing it for 10, 20, 30 years. So they come to the Guild conference because they want to learn something new. They want to understand what's happening in this field that nobody else is doing. They want to see a program model or a collaboration or a research breakthrough that's going to take their work to the next level. So consider that when you're you're shaping your proposal. These are folks that have been doing this work for a long time and are really well versed in the basics of providing effective arts education, the basics of nonprofit practice, and are really looking for what's innovative, what's gonna take our work to the next level and allow us to have a deeper impact in our community. So think about that when you're crafting your proposal. Substantiate effectiveness. Show, don't just tell. So this is really important when you're getting into the evidence for why, if you're proposing a new innovative way of doing things, you're saying our program has a really new effective way of fundraising in partnership with this local organization. Here's how we did it. Show us in your proposal what you're going to use to substantiate that effectiveness. What evidence is there? What story can you tell about why this was effective and about what happened when you had this intervention? People really want to know how you know that what you're talking about is something they should be listening to. So talk about that in your proposal. Clearly describe the learning objectives. This is really key for me. Sometime in this year's application, we actually called this out more specifically for people to indicate what the core learning objectives are. And in my mind, there should not be more than 4 core learning objectives. And even that sometimes can be ambitious. We really want people to zero in on what do you want people to get out of this session? What do you want them to understand? What do you want them to be better equipped to do? Do you want them to be able to create an action plan? Might that be too ambitious in 90 minutes? Do you really want them to understand this new area of arts education that that hasn't been delved into before, is new to the field? Maybe that's, if it's a big meaty learning objective, maybe 1 or 2 is enough. So be clear and concise about what your learning objectives are. And then some of the key criteria to keep in mind: relevance, equity, clarity of outcomes, and interactivity/creativity. So these map, not perfectly, but they map in some respects to the areas that we use in our rubric for when we're evaluating sessions. So is it relevant to the field? How relevant is it? Is it going to speak to the particular audience that comes to the Guild conference? Are people going to look at that session and say, that doesn't apply to me? We don't want any sessions at the conference to not be applicable in some way to folks that are there. So consider the people that are going to be at the conference and whether they would find that topic relevant. Equity: does this topic either consider how to be more equitable in the field, or is equity woven into just an element of the proposal that you put forward? That's also a way that we evaluate the quality of the proposal. The clarity of the outcomes. Are you clear, as I just mentioned, are you clear about what you want people to get out of this session? Do you know what people are going to walk away with? Do you know what new strategies they're going to be able to implement because they came to your session? And then interactivity and creativity. And I'll talk about this a little bit more, but we've learned over the years that particularly folks that come to the Guild conference, they're interactive, they want to get on their feet, they want to be engaged with folks in the room, they want to network. So there is a place for presentations that are a little bit more informational. If you're talking about new research, what you're really trying to discuss lends itself to a presentation format that is not as interactive, we consider that, of course, because that can be the case in certain situations. And there are people who come that learn better in that way. But knowing our audience, majority of people want those interactive sessions and they want to be able to engage with the people that are around them. Before I go on, Quanice, are there any questions that have come up?
Yeah, we have a 2-part question. So the first part of the question is, what are the attending organization's biggest pain points?
So that's a tricky question to answer, I think, in a concise way. But I would say that I would encourage that person to reach out. We could have a longer conversation about this, but I think it's really often we find that people's pain points are fundraising is one for sure, just making sure they have enough support in terms of their fundraising, effective partnerships, working in community in a way that supports their mission and is allowing them to maximize their impact in the best possible way. The kind of nuts and bolts of running an effective nonprofit. So it also varies. This year, a big pain point might be considering how the new tax bill is going to affect the finances of an organization. So it's hard to say concretely. It changes every year, but I would encourage that person to reach out if you want to have a longer conversation. But I've found that a lot of the organizations that come, they really know their programming extremely well. A pain point might be evaluating that programming, or evaluating that programming in a way that is in concert with other effective methods of evaluation. So framing the impact of their work in a way that's going to speak to funders, in a way that's going to speak to the community. Documenting and communicating impact is definitely a pain point. So people know their programming well, they know how to develop effective curriculum, but the way that they document it, the way that they communicate it to outside stakeholders, particularly funders, and that feeds into fundraising issues. And then the nuts and bolts of running an effective nonprofit can be a pain point, particularly for organizations that have a smaller budget size, which increasingly folks that come to the conference do. So that is a bit of an overview, but it's a nuanced question. So I hope that helps. But I'd encourage you to reach out to us if you want to get into that in a little more granular way.
Perfect. And then the second part of that question is if we could provide a breakdown of organizations who attend by budget size. So for that person, we would probably have to get in contact with them additionally afterward.
Absolutely. We have a graphic that includes that breakdown of budget size, and we can share that with folks after the fact. The kind of sweet spot is about between 750,000 and $1 million in terms of budget size. That's, I would say, is the average, but it really spans. And we have people that are organizations that are coming from 20 million plus budget size, and a bunch of organizations that are coming from under 100,000. So it definitely varies, but if you're looking for an average, it's around that 750,000 to $1 million a year budget size. But as Quenny said, we can share more specifics. Anything else right now, Quenny, before I move on?
That's all. I'm just answering a few questions in the box.
Okay, great. So continuing with effective proposals, these are just a few more tips. Demonstrate that the session will maximize engagement and participation. So as much as possible, show when those moments of engagement are going to happen. Talk about what it will entail. Talk about what materials are going to use for that engagement. Talk about ways that you have engaged audiences in the past, maybe with past presentations. So show, don't tell, opportunities for engagement that are going to happen during the session. The second one, harness the expertise that resides in the room. I think folks, particularly our audience, really appreciate when people recognize that there's a lot of expertise that is in the room, and create opportunities for people to speak to their own experience, to bring their own ideas. As a presenter, we want you to really be an expert in this topic, but you should also recognize that there are going to be people there who may bring a different idea, who may approach it from a different angle. Don't try to cover too much ground in the time allotted. This one is extremely important. I'll highlight it because for our audience and for folks that are coming to this conference, increasingly over the years, they have emphasized that they want depth, maybe as opposed to breadth. It's nice to have breadth in the learning as well, but going deep into the work and going deep into a particular case study is more important often to people at our conference than covering a ton of ground and citing as many resources as you can and showing a bunch of different slides and information. We really want you to dig into the topic and leave time for people to process it, leave time for people to ask in-depth questions. That I find can make for a really effective session. And then describe your handouts. You can also upload any handouts that you may already have, or resources that you are going to use during your session to give us a sense of what those resources are going to look like. All right, before I move on to some of the nuts and bolts, that was a overview of what we really see as an effective session and some of the elements that go into that. Are there questions, Juanice, right now? Is there anything we can answer? It looks like you've gotten to a few. Is there anything you want to bring out to the group?
Yeah, there was quite a few questions asking if someone can propose more than one workshop or session.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. You can propose as many as you'd like. You will only be selected as a speaker for one. So you can submit as many as you like, but just know that you're not going to present on multiple sessions necessarily. So, but yeah, you can submit as many as you'd like. Any other questions right now, Quinice?
We are good.
Cool. Okay, so the proposal review and notification. As I mentioned, the submission deadline is May 3rd. Notification deadline will be July 12th. And I'll just breeze through these last two bullets because they're intertwined. So as I mentioned, we may contact you to discuss your proposal. And that would happen in between that May 3rd and July 12th deadline, but it also may continue after July 12th. We'll generally be three versions of the notification. Either your proposal was not accepted, your proposal was accepted, but in a provisional way, and that's probably 95% of the notifications that happen around that July or earlier timeline. Sometimes we'll say this session was perfect as proposed, you're good to go, let's put you in the program book and we're set. But that's quite rare. Usually we ask folks to be open to tweaking things. We ask that you be open to working with other presenters. Often what will happen, and I think this is important to know, you may submit an idea for a session, and without knowing it, there are people across the country who are submitting something that may be slightly similar. They might be approaching it from a slightly different angle, but what we'll do behind the scenes is consider where those connections might lie. So if you, and you'll notice on the session proposal form, we say that we encourage people to consider collaboration, to consider outside partners. If you don't have that right now, that's completely understandable. We get that, but submit it knowing that we may have an opportunity to link what you're working on with what somebody else is working on as well. So we ask folks to be open to that, and that's often how we get those really strong sessions. We bring together different voices, so it's not just coming from one person, but people are talking about it from a number of different angles. So I'll quickly go over some of the registration policies. All presenters and panelists must register for the conference by the early registration deadline. This year, that early reg deadline is going to be in September. Speakers are eligible for registration discounts, and those are pretty steep discounts. We're still doing the math of what exactly that's going to look like this year, but speakers do get deep discounts to come to the conference. And then lastly, registration fees may be waived for external panelists who aren't participating in other conference activities. So sometimes we'll have speakers that are just coming from their session, aren't partaking in the learning, and we can make arrangements to give you a badge just for that session, and you don't have to pay for the full conference, recognizing that you're just coming to speak to that particular session. Okay, so before we dip into some final questions, I'm just going to review the key proposal steps. So if you are going to propose, review our website as well as our mission, vision, and values. It's important to have a sense for what the Guild does and what we really care about before you submit your session. Look over the sessions that were programmed at our previous conference. This may be the most helpful way to understand what we're looking for, what we really look for in a strong proposal. You can do that, as I said, by finding the application to submit a session proposal, and you'll find on that first page of the session proposal form, there is a link to the 2018 program. So look over that first page, look at those resources that are there, and take a look at what we programmed last year. Reach out to the Guild with any questions. Our email will be on the next page, but please, we're here. We want to have conversations. This isn't a closed, we're not a black box. We want, if you have an idea and you're not sure if it's applicable, not sure how to strengthen it, reach out to us. We're happy to have conversations. Both Quinice and I are really open to thinking through and talking with people. I think it's really exciting to hear people's ideas and consider how we can strengthen them. So please do reach out to us. The session proposal form, again, is at communityartsed.org, and you have to submit by May 3rd. Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions. We've already gotten to a few, but if there are lingering questions for folks, we have a few more minutes. And then, of course, we're always available for more questions. and this is an ongoing dialogue. So are there any burning questions right now?
There was a question that I answered in the Q&A box, but it might be good for everyone to hear. There was a question about travel stipend or financial aid availability.
Yes, absolutely. So we do have significant financial aid and travel stipends available. We really try to make costs not be a barrier for folks. And last year we gave out quite a considerable amount of money as in financial aid. So you can apply for financial aid and a travel stipend. We privilege folks that are coming from smaller organizations. But yes, please do feel free. And speakers, if you are accepted as a speaker, you can apply for those. But we do take into account the fact that as a speaker, you will be getting a discount. So speakers can apply, but we take into consideration the price point at which you're paying when considering whether to allot that second layer of financial aid, essentially.
Great. Another question is, when will registration information be available online for attendees?
So there is some registration information available where I think it's not today, in the next couple of days, we're getting a link up to some sample pricing. Some of that pricing stuff is still worked out, so this would just be pricing from last year, but that should be up shortly. Actual registration will open in July, and leading up to that, there'll be all the information about booking a hotel room and all of the things that you need to know in terms of paying for the conference, but also other ways to engage. I should mention too, folks can volunteer. If you don't end up being a speaker, there are tons of different ways that you can come to the conference and be a part of it. If you volunteer, it's free. So there's a number of different engagement points. More details about that will essentially be coming as we build out the full conference website, which will be launching before the registration opens in July.
Great. Another question that just came in is, can you talk about the difference between a workshop and lecture? This is a choice that has been made on the application. How interactive does a session need to be considered a workshop? So the person who submitted the question said, I'm working on a session that has interactive elements and is not a straight up lecture, but it's also not 100% a hands-on workshop. So should they choose other?
I don't know what you think, Juanice, but I would say go with workshop. When we say lecture, I think we're really envisioning, this is really designed generally for and maybe some other situations, but we program a couple of these sessions that are more lecture based, because some of the folks that come don't always want to be engaged in a workshop. They might just want to sit back and listen. But I would say choose workshop based on the little information that I have. If there is interactivity, if it's not solely just folks up there giving information and people receiving it, then I would go with workshop. But I don't know, Juanice, if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with that. If it's anything that's not a lecture per se, then I would say submit it as a workshop. Usually the other is for those who are like interested in proposing site visits. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, things that sort of fall outside the normal realm of those three different buckets, I would say choose other. Any other questions we can get to? We have a minute left, so not much time, but anything else, Juanice?
Nope. Any lasting questions?
All right, so we'll get folks out of here on time. Thank you so much for being here. We are, as I said, this is now my 5th conference. It's my favorite time of the year, and I'm really, really looking forward to building an amazing conference with you all. Reach out to us at conference@nationalguild.org if you have questions. This is really so we can filter and send the question to the best place. But we really want to hear from you, and we really, really look forward to reading all of your session proposals, and we'll see you all soon.